The rain had not stopped for 3 days. It fell in silver threads against the windows of the Moonlight Diner, a relic from another era that clung to the edge of the old highway like a memory refusing to fade. The neon sign outside flickered its perpetual invitation. Open 24 hours. Though the bulb in the first O had died sometime during the Clinton administration, and no one had bothered to replace it. Elena Vance pressed her palm against the cold glass of the front window and watched the water cascade down in rivulets that caught the amber glow of the parking lot lights. 37 years old, divorced, mother to a daughter now grown and living 3 states away. She had worked the night shift at the Moonlight for 11 years, long enough to know every crack in the linoleum, every temperamental quirk of the ancient coffee maker, every lonely soul who wandered through the door, seeking something more than food. The diner was nearly empty tonight. In the corner booth, old Mr. Hennessy nursed his 5th cup of decaf and pretended to read his newspaper, though Elena knew he came here mostly to escape the silence of the apartment where his wife of 42 years no longer waited. At the counter, a truck driver named Carl worked through a plate of eggs and hash browns, his rig idling in the lot outside, its headlights cutting through the rain like the eyes of some patient beast. The clock above the register read 2:47 a.m. Elena was refilling the sugar dispensers when the door opened. The bell chimed its familiar 2-note greeting, and she looked up expecting another weary traveler seeking shelter from the storm. What she saw instead made her pause, the sugar bag suspended in her hands. The man who entered was tall, impossibly tall it seemed, though perhaps that was a trick of the shadows that clung to him like a second skin. He wore a long coat of black wool, expensive and immaculate despite the rain, and beneath it a suit of charcoal gray that belonged in a different century, or perhaps a different world altogether. His hair was dark, almost blue-black in the fluorescent light, swept back from a face of such severe beauty that Elena felt something cold move through her chest. But it was his eyes that held her, pale gray, the color of winter storms, and filled with something she could not name, something ancient and weary and unutterably sad. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, water dripping from the hem of his coat onto the worn welcome mat, and surveyed the diner with the expression of a man who had walked into his own tomb and found it occupied by strangers. Then he moved to the booth farthest from the door, the one in the back corner that no one ever chose because the overhead light had burned out, and the shadows there were thick as velvet. He sat with his back to the wall, facing the entrance, and folded his hands on the table before him. Elena set down the sugar bag and smoothed her apron. 11 years on the night shift had taught her to recognize trouble when it walked through the door. This man was trouble of a kind she could not categorize, not dangerous in the way of the drunks who sometimes stumbled in looking for a fight, nor pathetic in the manner of the lost souls seeking a warm place to weep. He was something else entirely, something that made the hairs on her arms stand at attention, and her grandmother's voice whisper warnings from somewhere deep in her memory. Still, he was a customer, and Elena Vance had never turned away a customer. She picked up a menu and walked toward the dark booth, her sensible shoes squeaking softly against the floor. As she approached, she became aware of a strange sensation, a coldness that seemed to emanate from him, as if he were a window left open to the winter night. "Evening," she said, laying the menu on the table before him. "Can I get you something to drink?" He did not look at the menu. His eyes remained fixed on some point in the middle distance, as though he were watching something she could not see. "Coffee," he said. His voice was low and measured, each word precisely articulated, carrying the faint trace of an accent she could not place. "Black." "Coming right up." She returned to the counter and poured the coffee into one of the diner's heavy ceramic mugs. Her hands, she noticed, were trembling slightly. She steadied them with an effort of will and carried the mug back to his table. "Here you go," she set it before him. "Kitchen's open if you want to look at the menu. The pie's fresh. Made it myself this afternoon. Apple cinnamon. Best in the county if I do say so." He lifted the mug and inhaled deeply, as if the steam itself were nourishment. Then he took a slow sip, and something that might have been surprise flickered across his features. "It is acceptable," he said. Elena raised an eyebrow. 11 years of night shifts, 11 years of dealing with the tired, the drunk, the grieving, the lost. She had served senators and homeless men, brides still in their wedding gowns and soldiers fresh from war. She had been propositioned, insulted, ignored, and once memorably threatened with a butter knife by a man in the grip of a psychotic episode. Through it all, she had maintained her composure, her humor, her unshakable belief in the fundamental decency of most human beings. But something about this man, his dismissive tone, his complete disregard for even the most basic courtesies, struck a nerve that had been raw for longer than she cared to admit. Acceptable, she repeated. Well, I'll be sure to let Maxwell House know they've earned your grudging approval. The man's eyes snapped to her face for the first time, and Elena felt the full weight of that ancient gaze settle upon her. There was surprise there, she thought, genuine surprise, as if he had not expected the furniture to speak. You are impertinent, he observed. I'm honest, Elena corrected. There's a difference, though I suspect you don't encounter either very often. A long silence stretched between them. In the corner, Mr. Hennessy had lowered his newspaper to watch. At the counter, Carl had stopped chewing. The rain continued its relentless assault on the windows. Then, slowly, impossibly, the man's lips curved into something that was not quite a smile, but was certainly no longer a frown. No, he admitted, I do not. He picked up the menu and studied it with the same grave attention he might have given to a treaty or a death warrant. Elena watched him, arms crossed over her chest, waiting. The pie, he said finally. You claim it is the best in the county. I don't claim anything. It's a fact. Then I shall have a slice, and you shall sit with me while I eat it. I'm working. You have 3 customers. One is asleep over his newspaper. One is too preoccupied with his eggs to notice if the building caught fire. You can spare 5 minutes for a lonely traveler. Elena glanced at the clock. 3:02 a.m. Her shift ended at 6. 3 more hours in an empty diner, refilling coffee cups and wiping down counters that were already clean. Fine, she said, but only because I want to see your face when you taste that pie. She went to the kitchen and cut a generous slice of the apple cinnamon pie, still warm from the afternoon baking. She plated it with a small dollop of whipped cream and carried it to his table, sliding into the booth across from him. He picked up the fork with long, elegant fingers and cut into the pie with surgical precision. Elena watched as he brought the first bite to his lips. His eyes closed. For a moment, he was utterly still, so still that Elena was not certain he was breathing. Then his eyes opened, and in them she saw something she had not expected to see in this cold, imperious stranger. She saw wonder. When I was young, he said slowly, there was a woman in my village who made apple tarts. She would bake them on feast days, and the smell would fill the streets for hours. I have not tasted anything that reminded me of those tarts in. He paused, as if calculating. In a very long time. Your village, Elena said. Where was that? Far from here, far from anywhere you would know. Try me. He took another bite of the pie, chewing thoughtfully. You ask many questions. You showed up at 3 a.m, looking like you walked out of a Gothic novel. Questions are the least of what I could ask. That almost smile again. What else would you ask? Why are you really here? And don't say the pie, because you didn't know about the pie until 5 minutes ago. He set down his fork and regarded her with those storm-colored eyes. I am here, he said, because I am tired, because I have been walking for a very long time, and tonight the weight of it became too heavy to bear alone, because I saw your lights through the rain and thought, perhaps, that even a place as small and forgotten as this might offer a moment's respite from the darkness. Elena studied him, the perfect stillness of his posture, the way the shadows seemed to bend around him, the bone-deep weariness that haunted his beautiful, terrible face. How long? She asked quietly. How long have you been walking? He picked up his coffee cup and drained it in one long swallow. When he set it down, his hands were trembling. Longer than you could possibly imagine. The clock read 3:47 a.m. when he told her his name. Marius, he said, rolling the syllables across his tongue as though reacquainting himself with the sound. Once, long ago, I was called Marius Antonius Valerius. I was born in the year of our Lord 847, in a village in the mountains of what is now Romania. I was the 3rd son of a minor nobleman, and I was meant to be a priest. Elena had refilled his coffee 3 times. She had served Mr. Hennessy his 6th cup of decaf, and watched him finally nod off over his paper. She had waved goodbye to Carl as he climbed back into his rig and disappeared into the rain. The diner was theirs now, just the 2 of them, and the endless drumming of water against glass. A priest, she repeated. What happened? His hands tightened around the coffee cup. I died. She waited. She had learned long ago that the best way to draw out a confession was to offer silence, a space into which the secret could unfold of its own accord. I was 23 years old, he continued. I had taken my vows. I believed, with all the fervor of the young and the foolish, that I understood the nature of God and the shape of the world. Then, one night, something came to my village. His voice had dropped to barely a whisper. Elena leaned forward to hear him. It came in the form of a woman, beautiful beyond measure, with hair like spun gold and eyes the color of fresh blood. She walked among us like a queen, and we were powerless to resist her. She took what she wanted, our blood, our lives, our souls. By the time dawn broke, half the village was dead, and the other half was dying. And you? I was praying in the chapel when she found me. I thought my faith would protect me. I thought God would intervene. His laugh was hollow, bitter. Instead, she knelt beside me at the altar and whispered that she had been watching me for years, that she had chosen me, that I was to be her companion through the endless centuries. He fell silent. Outside, the rain had softened to a gentle patter. She turned you, Elena said. It was not a question. She made me what I am, a creature of the night, sustained by the blood of the living, condemned to walk the earth until the stars themselves burn out. For 12 centuries I have existed in darkness, watching everything I love wither and die, taking what I must to survive, and hating myself for the taking. Elena should have been afraid. She knew this with the rational part of her mind, the part that whispered of danger and monsters and the fundamental wrongness of what he claimed to be. But the greater part of her, the part that had spent 11 years learning to see the human heart beneath even the most fearsome exterior, saw only a man who had been alone for too long. Where is she now? She asked. The woman who turned you? Dead, destroyed by her own kind for breaking the old laws. She made me, and then she abandoned me, and I spent centuries believing that I was a monster born of her cruelty. He looked up, and his eyes were wet. It was not until much later that I learned the truth, that she had been dying, that her bloodline was ancient and powerful and would have ended with her. She turned me not from malice, but from desperation. She wanted to save something of herself, and I was the only vessel she could find. That doesn't excuse what she did. No, but it explains it. And explanation, I have found, is the first step toward forgiveness. Elena reached across the table and covered his cold hand with her warm one. He flinched at the contact, as if he had forgotten what human touch felt like. What happened to the village? She asked. Gone, lost to time and war and the endless march of history. I returned there once, perhaps 300 years ago. There was nothing left, not even ruins. Just an empty field where the chapel once stood, and a single apple tree growing wild where the baker's cottage had been. He turned his hand over and wrapped his fingers around hers. I took a cutting from that tree, kept it alive through plague and famine and revolution. When the new world opened, I brought it with me. I planted it somewhere it could grow in peace. Where? A small orchard in Virginia. It still stands, tended by a family who thinks they inherited it from a distant European relative. They do not know that the man who gave them that land watches over them still from the shadows, ensuring that the tree survives. Elena thought of the apples she used in her pie, sourced from a local farmer who drove down from Virginia twice a month. She thought of the way Marius had closed his eyes at that first bite, the wonder in his ancient gaze. The taste, she said slowly. You recognized it because those apples are descended from the tree of my village, the tree that grew in the yard of the woman who made apple tarts on feast days. He squeezed her hand gently. Her name was Maria. She was my mother. Elena felt tears prick at her eyes. 12 centuries. 12 centuries of loss and loneliness. And here in this forgotten diner, in a slice of pie made from the fruit of a tree he had carried across oceans and ages, he had found a thread connecting him to everything he had lost. Why are you telling me this? She asked. Why trust me with your story? He studied her face for a long moment. Because you stood up to me. Because you looked at me, truly looked, and you did not see a monster. You saw a man, a tired, rude, difficult man, but a man nonetheless. He released her hand and sat back in the booth. Do you know how rare that is? To be seen. As something other than a predator, to be treated with honesty rather than fear. You haven't given me anything to fear. I have killed thousands, Elena, tens of thousands across the centuries, men, women, children. I have taken their lives to sustain my own. I am exactly the monster that legends describe. Were you always, or did you become what you had to be to survive? His expression flickered. Surprise, then something softer. You have an uncommon wisdom. I have an uncommon amount of experience with people at their worst, and their best. She gestured at the empty diner. This place attracts the lost, the broken, the desperate. They come here at 3 a.m. because they have nowhere else to go, and they tell me things they've never told anyone. I've learned that most monsters are just wounded creatures who never found anyone willing to treat their wounds. He was silent for a long time. When he spoke again, his voice was rough. The woman who turned me, she was called the Queen of the Carpathians, an ancient, powerful, and by the end, quite mad. When she died, the others of her court looked to me as their new lord. I did not want it. I wanted only to disappear, to find some quiet corner of the world where I could exist without harming anyone, but they would not let me go. The others? Vampires, my kind, if such a word can be used for creatures so utterly alone. He spread his hands on the table. Beautiful hands, she thought, strong and pale and marked by centuries of survival. There are perhaps 1,000 of us left in all the world. Once there were many more. We have dwindled, faded, died by violence or simply by giving up. Those who remain have fractured into courts and covens, each ruled by one of the old blood. And you? I rule the oldest court of all, the first of the bloodlines, the foundation from which all others spring. His lips twisted bitterly. They call me the Vampire King, as if a title could capture the weight of what I have become. Elena absorbed this in silence. The Vampire King, sitting in her diner, eating her pie, confessing his sins to a middle-aged waitress with tired feet and flour stains on her apron. "Why did you come here tonight?" she asked again. "Really?" He met her eyes, and in his gaze she saw something raw and unguarded, something that looked almost like hope. "Because I received word 3 nights ago that my enemies are moving against me, that the youngest and most ambitious of the courts has grown tired of my rule and seeks to claim my throne. They will come for me soon, perhaps within the week, and when they do, they will destroy everything I have built, everyone I have protected. Can you stop them? Perhaps, if I choose to fight." He shook his head slowly. "But I have been fighting for 12 centuries. I am tired, Elena, so very tired. Part of me wants to simply let them come, let them end it, let me finally rest. And the other part? The other part stopped at a roadside diner because it saw a light in the darkness, because it remembered that there is still goodness in the world, still warmth, still the taste of a mother's apple tart." He smiled, a real smile, tired and sad but genuine. "The other part is not ready to let go of the light. Not yet." Dawn was breaking when the door of the diner opened again. Elena had lost track of time. She and Marius had talked for hours, about his centuries of wandering, about her failed marriage and her distant daughter, about the nature of loneliness and the fragile, persistent hope that keeps the lost from surrendering entirely to the dark. She had made more coffee, more pie, and somewhere in the small hours of the night, she had stopped thinking of him as a vampire and started thinking of him simply as Marius, a man of immense age and immense sorrow, seeking connection the same way all lost souls seek it. But the figures who entered now were not seeking connection. There were 3 of them, moving with the fluid grace that Elena had come to recognize in Marius. 2 men and a woman, all young in appearance, but their eyes were old, cold, and utterly without mercy. They wore dark clothing and pale expressions, and they looked at Marius the way wolves look at wounded prey. "Your Majesty," the woman said, her voice dripping with false deference, "we've been searching for you. Your subjects grow concerned." Marius rose slowly from the booth. The warmth that had gradually crept into his demeanor over the past hours was gone. In its place was the cold, imperious stranger who had first walked through the door. "Anya," he said, "I wondered how long it would take you to find me." "Not long. You've grown careless in your old age." She stepped closer, and Elena saw that her eyes were the color of dried blood. "The council has met. They've decided that your reign has lasted long enough." "Has it now?" "You've become weak, sentimental, attached to mortals and their fleeting concerns." Anya's gaze flicked to Elena, and her lip curled in disgust. "We need a king who understands what we are, what we're meant to be, predators, not philosophers." Elena should have stayed silent. She knew this with the part of her mind that still functioned rationally. These were creatures who could tear her apart with a thought, who viewed her as nothing more than food given form. But Elena Vance had never been good at staying silent in the face of injustice. "Funny," she said, stepping out from behind the counter. "You walk in here talking about strength and predators, but from where I'm standing, you just look like bullies." The silence that followed was absolute. Anya turned to face her, disbelief warring with rage in her ancient features. "The mortal speaks," she said softly. "How quaint." "The mortal has a name. It's Elena. And I've been dealing with bullies my whole life. At home, at work, in a marriage that tried to break me and didn't quite manage it. I know what strength looks like, and..." It doesn't look like three people ganging up on one tired old man in a diner at dawn. Anya moved faster than Elena's eyes could follow. One moment she was by the door, the next she was inches away, her cold hand wrapped around Elena's throat. "You understand nothing?" Anya hissed. "You are a speck of dust in the eye of eternity. Your entire existence is less than a heartbeat to us." "Maybe," Elena gasped, "but I'm not afraid of you." "You should be." "Enough!" The word cracked through the air like a whip. Marius had not raised his voice, but suddenly the temperature in the diner plummeted and the lights flickered, and Elena felt a pressure in the air like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. Anya released her grip and stepped back, something like fear flickering in her ancient eyes. "You would defend this mortal?" she demanded. "Over your own kind?" "I would defend anyone from your cruelty." Marius moved to stand beside Elena, placing himself between her and the three intruders. "That is what being a king means, Anya. It means protecting the weak from predators like you." "Predators are what we are, Marius. You've forgotten that in your dotage." "No. I have remembered what I was before I became this thing, before I was made into a creature of darkness by forces beyond my control. I was a man who believed in compassion, in mercy, in the sacred duty to protect those who cannot protect themselves." He reached out and took Elena's hand in his, and his cold fingers felt like anchors in a storm. "I have lived 12 centuries as a monster. If I am to die tonight, I will die remembering what it felt like to be human." Anya's eyes blazed. "So be it!" She lunged. What happened next was too fast for Elena to follow. A blur of movement, of shadows, of bodies moving with impossible speed. She heard impacts like thunder, felt the rush of displaced air, caught fragmentary glimpses of Marius moving with a grace and power that belied his weary demeanor. Then it was over. Anya and her companions lay on the floor of the diner, unconscious or dead. Elena could not tell which. Marius stood over them, his chest heaving, his elegant suit torn and bloodied. "They'll send more," he said quietly. "This changes nothing." "It changes everything." Elena walked to him, took his face in her hands, forced him to meet her eyes. "You fought for me, for a mortal you just met. You could have let them have you, let them end your weariness, but instead you stood up for someone weaker than yourself. It was foolish. It was right." She smoothed the strand of hair from his face. "That's what matters. Not the outcome, the choice." In the days that followed, Elena learned what it meant to stand beside a king. Marius did not leave after that night. He could not explain why, could not articulate the pull that kept him returning to the Moonlight Diner each evening, taking his place in the dark booth, waiting for Elena's shift to begin. Perhaps it was the pie, perhaps it was the coffee. Perhaps it was simply the presence of someone who looked at him and saw neither monster nor monarch, but simply a man in need of rest. The vampire courts grew restless. Word spread of the mortal woman who had defied Anya, who had stood in the presence of the vampire king and spoken to him as an equal. Some called it an abomination. Others called it a sign, a symbol of the change that Marius had long sought to bring to his people. Elena did not care about symbols or politics. She cared about the man who sat in her booth each night, telling her stories of centuries past, listening with genuine interest to her own tales of a simpler, shorter life. She cared about the way his eyes lit up when she brought him fresh pie, the way his hand found hers across the table as the hours wore on toward dawn. "They will come again," he told her one night, as rain once more lashed the windows. "The council, they cannot tolerate what I represent, a king who loves a mortal." "Love," Elena repeated. "Is that what this is?" He raised her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles. His mouth was cold, but his eyes were warm. "I have existed for 12 centuries, he said. "I have watched empires rise and fall, witnessed the birth of nations and the death of gods. I thought I had experienced every emotion that was possible for a creature such as myself." He met her gaze steadily. "I was wrong. What I feel for you, this warmth, this connection, this sense that I have finally, after all these ages, found someone who sees me as I truly am. It is new, it is terrifying, and it is the most precious thing I have ever known." Elena felt tears on her cheeks, warm, human tears, the opposite of everything he was. "I'm going to die," she whispered. "In 30 years, maybe 40 if I'm lucky. What happens to you then?" "I will grieve, I will remember, and I will carry you with me through the ages, as I carry the memory of my mother's apple tarts, as a reminder that even in the darkest night, there is always light to be found." She leaned forward and kissed him. His lips were cold, but the feeling that passed between them was anything but. It was warmth and connection, and the fierce, defiant joy of two lonely souls who had found each other against all odds. When they pulled apart, Marius was smiling, really smiling, without reservation or irony. "I have a proposition," he said. "I'm listening. The courts want a sign of my strength, a demonstration that I am still the king they fear and respect." He stood and offered her his hand. "I want you to stand beside me when I give them that demonstration. I want you to show them what true strength looks like. Not the violence of predators, but the courage of a woman who looks into the eyes of monsters and refuses to be afraid." Elena took his hand and rose to her feet. "And if they don't accept it, then we face whatever comes, together." The gathering took place in an ancient manor in the hills above the city, a place that had been old when the first European settlers arrived on these shores, though few mortals knew of its existence. Elena walked through halls hung with tapestries that depicted battles and coronations and the long, bloody history of the vampire courts, her hand in Marius's, her heart pounding with a fear she refused to show. The council awaited them in the great hall, a dozen figures of impossible beauty and ancient power, their eyes cold as winter stars. At their center sat Anya, her wounds from their previous encounter healed, her expression a mask of hatred. "You dare bring her here?" Anya snarled. "Into our sacred space? I dare many things." Marius released Elena's hand and stepped forward, his presence filling the hall like a storm. "I have ruled this council for 12 centuries. I have protected our kind from exposure, from extinction, from ourselves. I have sacrificed more than any of you can imagine to keep us safe. And in return," one of the other council members said, a pale, thin man with eyes like chips of obsidian, "you ask us to accept a mortal as your consort? I ask you to accept that times have changed, that the old ways of violence and secrecy and eternal solitude are leading us toward extinction." Marius's voice rang with authority. "In the past century alone, our numbers have declined by half. We are dying out, not from hunters or daylight, but from despair, from the crushing weight of an existence without meaning." He turned and extended his hand to Elena. She moved to his side, her chin held high despite the hostile gazes that surrounded her. "This woman, this mortal, has shown me that there is another way, that we do not have to be prisoners of our nature, that connection, compassion, and yes, love are not weaknesses, but strengths." He looked out at the gathered vampires, and his eyes were fierce. "I offer you a choice. Follow me into this new age, or remain in the darkness of the old. But know that I will not change course. I will not abandon what I have found, and I will not surrender my throne to those who cannot see beyond their own hunger." Silence stretched across the great hall. Elena could feel the tension like a physical force, pressing against her from all sides. Then, slowly, one of the council members rose. He was old. Elena could see it in his eyes, though his face was unlined, and he moved with the careful deliberation of one who has seen centuries pass. "Your Majesty," he said, "when you first took the throne, I thought you weak, unsuited to rule, a priest playing at being a king." He paused, and something that might have been a smile crossed his weathered features. "I was wrong. You have led us through ages of turmoil, protected us from threats we did not even know we faced, and shown a wisdom that few of our kind ever achieve." He crossed the hall and knelt before Marius. "If you say this mortal is worthy, if you say this path is the one we must follow, then I will follow it. I am old, my king, old enough to know that the greatest threat we face is not daylight or hunters. It is the death of hope, and you," his eyes flicked to Elena, "and she have brought hope back to us." One by one, the other council members rose. One by one, they crossed the hall and knelt. Even Anya, her face twisted with fury, eventually bowed her head in submission. Marius looked at Elena, and in his eyes she saw something she had never expected to see in the face of an immortal monster. She saw peace. They returned to the diner as dawn approached. The moonlight was quiet, its neon signs still flickering its tired welcome, its booths and counters waiting patiently for the next parade of lost souls seeking warmth in the darkness. Elena pushed through the door and breathed in the familiar scent of coffee and pie and the faint mustiness of a building that had weathered decades of storms. "Home," she said softly. Marius followed her inside, his eyes sweeping across the worn linoleum and cracked vinyl with something approaching reverence. "Is this what home feels like? I had almost forgotten. Home isn't a place." Elena moved behind the counter and began the ritual of preparing a fresh pot of coffee. "It's a feeling, the sense that you belong somewhere, that there's a space in the world carved out just for you. And you feel that here?" She looked at him, at the vampire king, the ancient monster, the tired man who had walked through her door on a rainy night, seeking respite from the darkness. "I feel it with you," she said simply. He crossed to the counter and leaned against it, watching her work with those storm-gray eyes. "What happens now?" "Now we figure it out, day by day, night by night." She smiled at him, a real smile, warm and unguarded. "You've got 12 centuries of experience. I've got a really good recipe for pie. Between the two of us, I think we can manage." He laughed, a real laugh, rusty with disuse but genuine. "You are extraordinary, Elena Vance. I'm a waitress who makes pie and pours coffee and listens to the troubles of strangers in the middle of the night." She set a fresh cup before him. "But I suppose, for a 1,000-year-old vampire king, that's pretty exotic." 1,200, he corrected. "And yes, it is." She came around the counter and took his hands in hers. Cold and warm, ancient and mortal, monster and woman. Two threads woven together against all probability, against all reason. "I don't know what the future holds," she said. "I don't know if your council will stay loyal, or if there are more enemies coming, or how many years I have left." She squeezed his hands. "But I know this. As long as I'm breathing, you have a place here. With me, in this stupid, wonderful, falling-apart diner on the edge of nowhere." He raised her hands to his lips and kissed them, his cold breath warm with emotion. "Then I am home," he whispered, "at last. After 12 centuries of wandering, I am finally home." Outside, the beau rain had stopped. Through the windows of the Moonlight Diner, they watched as the first pale light of dawn touched the horizon, gold and rose and the softest shade of amber, spreading across the sky like a promise. Marius would need to seek shelter soon. The daylight was still his enemy, as it had been for 1,200 years. But for this moment, this fragile, perfect moment, he stood in the light with Elena, feeling its warmth on his face, knowing that he was no longer alone. And in the weeks and months and years that followed, the regulars at the Moonlight Diner would speak of a curious change that had come over the place. The pie tasted better, they said, the coffee was richer. And the waitress behind the counter, Elena, the one who had worked the night shift for longer than anyone could remember, seemed happier, lighter, as if a weight she had carried for years had finally been lifted. No one ever asked about the man who sometimes sat in the dark booth in the back corner, his pale hands wrapped around a coffee cup, his storm-gray eyes fixed on Elena with an expression of profound and timeless love. No one asked where he came from, or why he only appeared after sunset, or why the shadows seemed to bend around him like living things. Some secrets, after all, are meant to be kept, and some loves, the rare, precious, impossible ones, are meant to endure forever. In the dark booth, Marius raised his coffee cup in a silent toast to the woman behind the counter. In her hand was a fresh slice of apple cinnamon pie, made with fruit from a tree that had survived 12 centuries, tended by hands that would never grow old, nourished by a love that transcended the boundaries between the living and the dead. Elena smiled at him, and he smiled back. And outside, the night wrapped itself around the Moonlight Diner like a protective embrace, keeping safe the two lost souls who had found each other in the darkness, the vampire king and his mortal queen, together until the end of all things, the last of the old stories, the first of the new, forever.